Hey everybody, welcome to episode 48 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back, welcome aboard. On today's show, we're going to do something a little different than in previous episodes. This is officially the last episode of Season 2. It has also been roughly a year and a half since this podcast began, and nearly 2 years since the very first recording that would lead to this podcast. All right, so I'm already recording.
Okay, so my name's Nung Lung. I'm 32 this year and come over from Australia to go rock climbing in the States for 3 months.
Today's show will consist of 3 edited stories.
This is Steven Calcote.
I'm Dusty.
I just love the idea of just getting in the middle of nowhere.
And my reflections on the last year and a half of doing this show. Welcome to the very first episode of the Go Get Outside podcast. I am your host. It is the end of Season 2, and so it's time now for us to take a bit of a break so we can get caught up on all things podcast related and otherwise, and come back in May. I haven't decided yet whether that will be the 1st or 16th of May, but do expect the podcast to return in May. Since the episode will be wrapping up with my reflections on the last 48 episodes, I will take the time now to do those things that I normally pester you all with at the end of the show, and I will do it much more quickly than usual. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can send us an email, go@butcherbirdstudios.com, or you can give us a call, 818-925-0106, and leave us a message on our Google voicemail. And in the meantime, please run to whatever podcast purveyor you prefer, and make sure you have subscribed to the show, and please rate and review the show. And since we will be on hiatus for a couple of months, now would be a great time to go back, catch up on those episodes you've never heard, or take another listen to some of those that you particularly enjoyed in the past. And if you'd like to do us a big favor, please share the show with someone who you think may enjoy it. And so let's go ahead and delve into the show. We have 3 stories coming up, one from Butcherbird's own Steven Calcote about his queasy times in Mexico, a favorite from episode 4 with Scott Swaney about his youthful adventures in freediving, and Dusty Hulet's story from episode 6 about the fabled Yellowstone Gorilla.
It was my first big movie job. I was an assistant to the producers on this cool HBO film called and starring Pancho Villa as himself, which actually starred Antonio Banderas. I really wanted to make sure that this was the perfect job experience. I wanted to show these producers that I was their number one worker, that nothing would stop me, that they should feel very good about having brought me all the way to the middle of Mexico in San Miguel de Allende in the mountains of Guanajuato. However, at some point in pre-production, I got sick. Very sick. I had to continuously drink water in order to keep from passing out. Something was going wrong with my body. Anything that came in went out almost immediately. And I was still running around like a good producer's assistant. After 2 days, I was called in for a regular pre-production meeting with the producer. He took one look at my face, which apparently was a really startling and frightening shade of green. He turned to the local translator and said, "Get my assistant to the hospital immediately." What you think of as a hospital was not where I was taken. I was taken to a little clinic in the middle of countryside Mexico, which is where I woke up having passed out on the way there about 6 hours after having had an IV bag tapped into my arm and being treated for salmonella poisoning intravenously. And when I woke up, the translator was still there and he said, "Please call your mother. Tell her that you are in good hands." Wanting to reassure my mother that I was in what you would think of as a hospital and not a clinic in the middle of nowhere, having almost died after severe dehydration. I wanted her to feel really relieved that her son was in good hands. So they hand me the phone, not a great connection.
Hello, Mama, I'm doing great.
Just as I say that, the most amazing comes out of nowhere. And it turns out that there was a group of donkeys grazing right outside my window. And one of them had chosen that moment to put his head in and announce to the world that he was in my room. When my mother said,
Is that a donkey?
shattering her image of the modern hospital that production had done their best to reassure her about, I replied, it must be a television somewhere in the background.
And then when I was in a cave in Florida, deep sinkhole pit, 35 feet in, it goes into a diving bell, upside down bell with a compressor blowing air down in there. And they put a line down with a little light bulb in it. When they're giving classes, the divers can come up and put their head in there and take their mask off and talk. All these swimmers were above, and I just had my snorkel and fins, and I went down, and I could see that diving bell way back in there. And I said, I'm gonna make it to that diving bell, holding my breath. So I got into the diving bell, and I'm breathing the air. 70, 80 feet down, I could see these divers down there, back in the cave with my light. I had a diving light with me. So I said, I'm going to hold my breath here and dive down. So I dived down to these guys. I'm in a cave with just my snorkel and fins on and a light. And these guys turn around and they see this guy snorkeling down to them, and they're like shocked. And I tapped on the guy and you could tell I needed a breath of air. So he gave me a breath of air off his tank, and then I just went back up to the diving bell. Then when I finally went back into the entrance, they thought I had drowned. The swimmers had seen this guy go down, mass snorkel and fins, and he hadn't come up for like 5 or 10 minutes. So they had search and rescue there. They thought it was going to be some kind of body recovery that I had drowned. They had no idea that I was down there in that diving bell.
Creativity loves constraints. Our town was just small enough that no one shot us for the things we did, but it was just big enough that no one recognized us on the second time around. Really creative group of friends, very interesting experiences. One of which was buying a gorilla suit on eBay. You go to Yellowstone and you just pull over your car and point, and 6 other people will pull over because everyone wants to see the animals. If you give them something black and furry to look at and you put it across the river and 400 yards out, they'll stop and they'll stay. Once they stop and stay, it snowballs. So then you have, the Swedish guy who's like got his scope out now and he's looking through it and he says, "It is not a bear, it is a gorilla." And then they're trying to decide if gorillas live in Yellowstone because they thought mountain gorillas were a different continent. And so, we had friends out there, and then we had others of us taking turns being planted up on the hillside to be the pointers. The tour buses start to unload, and then suddenly you have several hundred people there, and then traffic's blocked and slowed down, and cars lining the side of the road for half a mile each way as people congregate to see this gorilla who's pacing up and down logs and slamming his hands on the ground very stereotypically like a monkey, but he's 400 yards away, so you're not really sure what he's doing. While on the hillside, a ranger approached, and a woman who had become aware that it was a guy in a gorilla costume, she asked if anything was being done that was illegal because she was very upset. The ranger said, well, he's not doing anything wrong. That was all the cue we needed to take off as we saw the ranger picking up a second gun from his car and heading out to go talk to the gorilla. So we went back 2 weeks later, and the buffalo had moved into our ideal location. We decided that a gorilla in the buffalo herd might not go over well for the gorilla, so we moved on to a different location. First time there was 4 of us, and we drove home talking about how words will never be able to describe the humor of that day. So we came back this time with 11 people because everyone had heard about it. I I didn't want to get a seatbelt ticket because we had too many people crammed in the Suburban, so 2 of us wandered up the road. And as we did, the ranger approached the car of our friends. They decided to lie and tell them they didn't know anything about the gorilla. At the same time, the guy in the gorilla suit walked out of the bushes with the plastic bag, which was the gorilla suit. So the ranger ordered them all out of the car. Meanwhile, I'm trying to make my way down through the trees to find the gorilla guy who had ran into hiding. All of our friends are lined up with an armed guard with a shotgun. They're all sitting on the side of the road with their arms behind their backs. And the girl driving the Suburban was being interrogated. Suddenly, without intending to become so, we had become fugitives. My friend Zach and I wandered back up to a scenic overlook where we decided we would enjoy the view until they came and found us, which they did. And they encircled us, had us put our arms out to the side, not up, out to the side. We were frisked in the event that we had, I guess, additional gorilla suits on us or something. And we were separated and interrogated and belittled. I took the heat, so I'm filling out this report about the psychological experiment I'd been conducting in the park to see how people would interact with a new species. Very sarcastic. They took the gorilla suit, they confiscated it, gave me a $100 ticket, and they also took my mannequin head that was in the bag with the gorilla suit. So we left, and it took us like weeks to figure out how to get the suit back. A decade after that happened, I went back to Yellowstone with some of those same friends, and we asked the junior ranger at Old Faithful, have you ever heard of a gorilla in Yellowstone National Park? And he said, well, there was this one time. Last year, they called my parents' house looking for me to talk to me because I was the precedent for a new case that had come up in the park. The legend lives on.
Returning listeners to this show have probably heard multiple times about the road trip that Erika and I took across the country for 2 months last fall. That was part of a video project we were doing for portable power company TYLT, and I am happy to announce that beginning this week, the episodes for that series will be going online. So if you head to our website, gogetoutside.com/podcast, episode 48, you will find some photographs from that trip, as well as links to where you can watch that series, which will be TYLT.com/untethered. That is TYLT, TYLT/untethered. We put together 2 shows, one called Untethered My Passion and one called Untethered on the Road. My Passion features profiles of various interesting people, some of which have been on this podcast in the past. And On the Road features Erika and I traveling across the U.S. for 55 days. Part of that project involved us documenting everything we did for those 55 days on the road. And on our very last day, I sat down and Erika recorded me reflecting on what it was like to work on this podcast while on the road, and it turned into a reflection on what it's been like to do this podcast in general for the last nearly 2 years. I will leave you now with the audio from the preview for the Untethered on the Road series that we'll be releasing later this week, and my reflections on this podcast. And I would like to send a personal thank you to all of you out there who are currently listening, have listened in the past, and will listen in the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this show, and I hope it has been rewarding for you in some capacity. See you in May. It's a little fisheye lenses. Woo!
Whoa, you're out of control, man.
My name is Jason.
Hi, I'm Erika.
Thanks to TYLT, we are going to go on a road trip for 7 weeks, all across the U.S., to going new places I've never been, to seeing people that augment their life by getting outdoors and leading a perfectly normal life like all the rest of us do. She's going to be working from the road. I will be working on the podcast and this video series out of a car, out of a tent, out of coffee shops, and sharing that with those of you who want to watch this. You'll get to see us in varying stages of cleanliness. Luckily, you will not be able to smell us, so come back for more Untethered on the Road. Shower time!
Oh my goodness.
Woo! this road trip, other than just being an opportunity for Erika and I to travel across the U.S., is also a work trip. So she's been working from the road and I've been working from the road. We've both been recording all sorts of video and photographs and documenting the trip itself. And so that's been a job in and of itself. She's been working on the books that she works on regularly, and I've also been working on my podcast. So in the 8 weeks that we were gone, I published 4 episodes. And so what that would mean is, as we went along the way, I had set up discussions with people in different states. So I met Jen in Orlando, Janine in Idaho, and Michigan, and all kinds of other places. So a lot of the places we were going, we knew that on very specific days, I needed to stop and meet people to talk to them for the podcast and record an episode. So we would, to a certain degree, tailor our trip to that. We'd know this day we need to be here, this day we need to be here. In between this, we can kind of play with it and go places we want to. So I would meet these people, we would discuss different things that they do, whether it's mountain bike riding, fly fishing, running a wilderness school, surfing, a variety of these things, and then also kind of their philosophy on the outdoors and their life. It was a little tricky because we're living on the road, out of motels, out of campsites, out of tents. Sometimes we don't have access to Wi-Fi or showers or electricity for days at a time. So what we would have to do is I'd have to communicate with these people, then we'd have to go meet with them. A lot of times I'd be meeting them for the first time, get to know them a little bit, and then record the episode. Episodes come out twice a month, on the 1st and the 16th of every month. I didn't want to stop publishing episodes while we were on this trip. So what I did was I pre-edited episodes that were going to come out, and then I would have to record intros and outros and then cut all of that together on the road. So we would stop at parks. I recorded one while we were staying with Swaney in Michigan and a few other places, and then I would cut it together, prep everything for the website, review it, which is QCing it, quality control, make sure it sounds right, there are no errors in it, upload that, and then on the 1st and 16th, the episode would go live. So each episode that came out while I was on the road took about 3 hours of additional work while on the road to make sure it could come out. And it was a little tricky finding the places to do that, but it was also really cool because we'd stop somewhere and there'd be some park we've never been to, and I'd sit down on some wet bench and for 15 minutes record the intro and outro. We did this in one of the places, I don't even remember what state it was anymore because we went to 42 different states in the last 2 months. But we stopped at this one little park alongside the road next to a river. It was somewhere outside of Oregon, might have been in Idaho or Wyoming or somewhere like that. The people that worked there were taking their golf cart and they were riding it back and forth, checking on things on the grounds. And they would kind of laugh as they'd see me there with my microphone in my face, recording an episode, and then they'd wave to me. So fun stuff like that would happen. Or I got to grab Swaney, who's one of the Butcherbird people, and ask him to record a quote that I wanted to include in one of the episodes because he happened to be there and he happens to be a good actor. And so we sat around a campfire he had struggled to build that night. I recorded the intro and outro, and he recorded the quote for me, and then cut the episode together, put it up, and it turned out really well. Despite the fact that this had to be done out of a car, out of a tent, out of whatever, out of coffee shops, I don't think it affected in a bad way the episodes. I think it added a lot. Part of what I really like about doing the podcast is that I do get to meet all these different types of people that I wouldn't meet otherwise. Erika and I were commenting on how we'd drive somewhere and we'd meet a person we've never met before, like for instance Janine or Paul in Michigan, and they'd invite us into their home or they'd meet us at a park and we'd sit down and it was like we were friends with them. Part of the reason the podcast works so well is I'm not interviewing people about their jobs per se or the responsibilities of life. I'm interviewing people about things that they're super passionate about. And so all the time people tell me, oh, your episodes are so long, you talk to such good people, I'm not gonna be able to talk for an hour, I'm not gonna have anything to say. And I always say, you're gonna be fine, trust me, just sit down and we'll talk. And usually we go for an hour and 15, an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. When we were in Michigan talking to Paul and Dylan, we easily went 2 hours. And it's because these people are talking about something they're passionate about. It usually takes a few minutes to get them started, but as soon as you get them talking about this thing they really care about, that really accentuates their life, they open up and they just have so much to say and so much to share, and they start reminiscing about things. For instance, Paul and Dylan, when I was talking to them, they had said that they had gotten off this trail recently. It was a long distance biking trail that they did that took like a month or so, and they hadn't had time to process it. And it kind of like this trip, you do so many things each day, they kind of blur together and you forget about them. And so it became an opportunity for them to remember it and then kind of relive it as they talked about it. And so that's one of the great things about this show. I meet great people who have all these things to share, and then they also get something back from it in that they get to relive moments from their life, and they get to sometimes really sit and reflect about things. So far, no one has ever said, oh, I regret doing that. Usually people at the end have say like, oh, thank you, that was so fun. And they expected it to be some uncomfortable thing, and then by the end, they're like, oh, it's already over? I didn't know that that was what was gonna come from doing a podcast like this. I didn't know that it was going to be anything but people doing me a favor, me taking time out of people's lives and asking them to do something for me. So it's kind of nice that, in a sense, it's something that they also get an enjoyment out of, and then they get to share it with people. And then a lot of times people tell me things such as, people always ask me about this and I can't explain it to them, or they don't really understand it, but I can give them this and they can go listen to it and they can get an idea of what it's like. That's one of the reasons I like doing this podcast. It was a responsibility to do it on this trip, but it also added a lot to it in a lot of ways, even for Erika, who got to come along sometimes and watch or maybe shoot some video while I was talking to people. And in the case of when we were in Michigan at Paul's house, he had put out all kinds of food for us and practically a museum of his experiences. So he fed us and he was recommending places for us to go. So it was new friends that we met as we went. It really did add a lot to the trip, and so I'm glad that I did that. I could easily just talk to people on Skype, and I try not to do it, and I've done it a couple times, and the shows usually turn out fine, and people still like them. But I think a lot more is gained when I can sit down and look the people in the face, and they can look at me in the face, and we can connect on some level like that. Traveling around to meet them sometimes might seem like a pain in the ass, like driving across the country or driving a few hours away or driving an hour out of a way to some place that someone wants to meet that we don't need to go. But it turns it into an activity, into an event. I think it makes it more important to me and to them, because it's a thing we have to go meet somewhere to do, and we have to set aside the time to do it, and so then it means something. Hopefully it goes on for a long time, and hopefully people listen to it, and hopefully it means something to the people that listen to it. I have gotten emails from people, sometimes quite surprising emails. I think of it as like, oh, I just do this goofy little dumb show where people have to listen to me talk and listen to cooler people than me talk. It's minimally edited, and maybe it goes on for a long time. And I think, does anybody care about this, and should they care about this? But every once in a while I get an email, sometimes from places I have no idea how they've heard about it. Norway and Canada and other parts of the US. And probably the email I've gotten that left the strongest impact on me was a guy who emailed me and said that, he didn't go into detail, but he said that he had lost everything he loved in life and he couldn't do any of these things that people on the show do anymore, and that he was suicidal, but that this podcast let him relive those experiences and gave him hope. It was so weird because I thought, this is just a dumb little thing I do. I can't believe it could actually have that kind of impact on somebody. But then it also told me, don't fuck around, Jason. Do these right and keep doing them, because there might be people out there who you're going to let down if you stop. So I guess it's bigger than me at this point, and hopefully it becomes a bigger, even better thing. Paul is 60, and then he and another guy who's 20, Dylan, they both did this long distance, basically the mountain biking version of the Continental Divide Trail. So a trail that goes from Canada down to almost the Mexican border. One of the things that was awesome is that he got into it because his kids gave him a mountain bike because they were worried he was out of shape. And it went from, let's see if we can get dad outside on a bike, to dad getting so into it that he decides to do this 2,600-mile trail by himself at 60. You could tell that it made such a difference in his life because he loved to talk about it, and he had shirts from it, and his kids made him a hardback book of his journal entries and each day that he was on the trail and the pictures he took. And he brought out his bike to show us, and he brought out a map of it, and he had his book out, and he had all these other things out, and he had set aside food for us. You could just tell this was a thing that really meant something to him. And afterwards he also sent me a few messages just with updates about things that we had talked about or other things that are going on, because this is not just a thing he's doing once, this is his life now. Erika just said some stuff that I think is really a good way to encapsulate it. She said it was as if he had just had a new baby
And when someone just becomes a parent and they share all these photos of their kids and they share the experience and they just want to share this thing with everyone, except this was an experience, an event in his life, something other than that. This is a person who has children, so he has already experienced that, but now he's getting a similar experience by deciding to do something with his life that might seem trivial, but clearly isn't, because it leaves such a huge impact on how he chooses to live his life, how he looks at life, and what he thinks about each day when he wakes up, and what gives him purpose, what fuels a passion. It might seem like it's just going out and riding a bike. Clearly, it is a much huger thing, and it's had such a positive impact on his life. And that's one of the other reasons I do this podcast, is because it's really easy to think like, oh, these just people just go outside and they hike or they go climb a rock or whatever, and why does that matter? Listen to the show and you'll find out why it matters, because people's lives, and this is going to sound melodramatic, but people's lives change when they get into these things. They change the way they think, they change the way they live, and usually it's for the positive. And as Erika just said, sometimes they find who they are, which I think is not an inaccurate statement. Sometimes people are looking for who they are, and sometimes they find it by going outside. John Muir said something, can't remember how it goes, so I'm going to butcher it. It was something along those lines where we go outside to go inside. Basically that we go outside to find out who we are on the inside. And that's why I hope this show matters.